Again, my name is Moses. I use the pronouns he, him, or they, them, and I'm currently based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm an organizer with the Nonviolent Medicaid Army, and a part of the Freedom Church of the Poor. And as you can see, to open up tonight, we have two readings kind of pairing up the first service of Pride. One of them is the article that I'll get a little bit into. But in the other reading, we hear a story from Mark, and it's a story about a man who's hurting and in need of healing. And when Jesus approaches him to do so, when Jesus approaches him to heal him, the Pharisees scold him. It's the Sabbath. And by healing this man, Jesus would be breaking the rules of the Sabbath. And as you can see in the article, Jesus is left a little flabbergasted. What good are there rules for the Sabbath if this injured man would not be able to fulfill his Sabbath without their help and their healing? They're in a conflict about rules, interpretation of the rules, who makes the rules, who do the rules affect, and what rules are meant to be broken, and when are we meant to reach out and help folks and really break through kind of these things. And so this actually pairs kind of nicely with what we're talking about tonight, which is about an article that I recently co-wrote with West McNeil, also with a lot of support from Aaron Scott and Jacob Butterly and folks at the University The Poor Journal team. And the article is called Culture War or Class War, and it's about the rise of anti-trans legislation. In the article, Wes and I discuss the rise and history of anti-trans legislation, and we discuss the response of both the Democrats and the Republicans. The reason it feels fitting to pair it with this reading tonight is because much of our research illuminated the fallacies behind this anti-trans ideology, from the fallacy of these being put forward to protect children, or the fallacy of these being put forward to protect families. These rules that are being put forth to us that are said to be God ordained about living our lives have proven actually not to be God ordained, but instead pretty maliciously created by human beings. And so tonight, I'm not going to go into the specifics about the actual research within the article. The reason why is I tried to do that in a writing of this, and then it turned really long. And so I thought maybe what would make the most sense is if I just encourage folks to read the article, but if I can spend my time kind of pulling back a little bit and try to pull out some of the themes from this research and think about what we can learn from what we've researched as people of faith and as organizers. And so I can start with some of the origins of the article and kind of where I came into this. So I work with trans and non-binary youth at my day job, and working with youth, I would hear a lot, and I still hear a lot, about the bullying that they experience outside of the confines of our programming. And I am continually upset and angered to realize that oftentimes the bullying that they get outside of our programming comes from either behind the pulpit or from their own church communities. I also have faced a fair amount of pretty disturbing rhetoric, often hid behind the being the will of God, or protected in the freedom of speech in folks across Georgia. And I also went to a Methodist seminary. I was there for a year, and it was also the year that the Methodist Church officially split, mostly on the basis of same-sex marriage and whether or not gay people and trans folks could get ordained. And so I witnessed a lot of my close friends and churches financially and structurally suffer from kind of this whole question of LGBTQ plus affirmation and inclusion within the church. And so I started to feel like a little bit agitated when we would do a battle for the Bible session or a class, and this issue of LGBTQ plus affirmation and inclusion with the church wasn't raised as one of the most defining issues of our church today. And there were two reasons that I felt this way. The first is because I saw that there was an opportunity for us to more strongly develop an analysis around this struggle, because I experienced this bad theology hurting myself and the people that I love. And I do believe that it's true that bad theology kills people. And I think not just in terms of leading folks to ending their own lives or leading folks to perpetuate violence, but I also think bad theology kills people when a church puts its priorities in condemning and judging people rather than showing concern for people's everyday material needs and struggles. bad theology can push people to look away from things that are actually affecting their everyday lives, access to healthcare, access to affordable housing, and encourage them to just like channel all of their energy into fake social concerns, and especially in this question, it's around like whether or not like gay people should be able to get married, or whether or not, all this kind of stuff. And so this reactionary anti-trans movement and theology, it doesn't just impact like gay and trans people, but also people who have been fed lies about what God is concerned about and what God cares about and what God wants of our churches and of us as people of faith. A bad theology can excuse the church for not being there to be concerned and fighting for us to have access to our basic needs. The other reason, second to that, is that I'm a revolutionary. And so I know that nothing is as it seems. And so I see this rise of anti-LGBTQ laws and hate and all this stuff. And I like knew that there had to be something way deeper and way more complicated behind this theology and this movement, and that it wasn't actually about gay and trans people, but actually about a much larger political maneuver. And if we really dove into the history of how this came to be, we would probably learn quite a bit about our enemy and quite a bit about what we're up against. And that is kind of exactly what happened. And so going into this article, we really thought about like the two sectors of capital that are kind of fighting each other in the US. And when I say this, I really mean that like there's one sector of capital that's kind of more focused on shifting capital outwards. And within the context of the US, that capital kind of finds its home in the Democratic Party. And then there's another sector of capital, which is more domestically oriented. And that sector of capital aligns itself with the white Christian nationalist movement and like the Republican Party of the US. And as you can probably feel it, because we see it every day, these two sectors of capital are in conflict with each other. We're seeing this play out every single day in our politics on a daily basis. And even though these both sections look different, and they might have different ways of going about it, at the end of the day, both of them still want capitalism. But what they're in conflict about is how to move capitalism forward and how to maintain control over society. And what I mean by this is, we may live in a country with 140 million poor and low income people, and with poverty being the fourth leading cause of death in the US. But even because of that, neither of these sectors of capital, the Democrats or Republicans, have actual solutions or want to create actual solutions to the issues that we're facing, especially in terms to this current economic and political crisis. And so in order to distract us from that reality, which is that they got no ideas and they've got no solutions, their whole plan is that we're just going to scapegoat people and scapegoat other communities. So folks think that other communities are the issue. And really, as we see, this anti-trans movement is no different. So as we research into the origins of the anti-trans movement, we discovered, and there's a lot of stuff I want to specifically shout out. There was a podcast that was really helpful called the Anti-Trans Hate Machine from Translash Media. But through our research, we discovered that a lot of these white Christian nationalist organizations, so stuff you might have heard of like Focus on the Family or the Family Research Council, they had put in a lot of time and money into going into communities and basically workshopping what would be the best ways to reach communities and make people like fear LGBTQ folks and movements. We found proof that this rhetoric and wave of laws didn't just come out of thin air and wasn't actually delivered from God or weren't actually what people were organically concerned or worried about, but were instead part of a reactionary movement that really knew how to organize and mobilize huge sections of our class into neo-fascist groups or populist and reactionary movements. But there's also another end of that, right? Because that's a little bit more about the more reactionary sector. But then we can think more about like the Democrats. And to be honest, it's very clear that the Democrats don't actually have a response to this movement. They might issue press releases and statements about how much it upsets them to see this happening, but there's also been no real federal action that we can point to that has shown any kind of effort to stop or slow these movements or these bills from happening. Democrats can try as much as they want to say that they have queer and trans people's interests at the forefront of their mind. But I just like what material protections have poor working LGBTQ folks been provided in the midst of a Democratic party that we can, a Democratic presidency that we can actually point to. As we know, trans and queer folks are overrepresented in poverty, in unemployment, and in homelessness. And we've just seen in the past couple of years the Medicaid cutoffs, which were agreed on by both parties and signed into effect by President Biden, have cut more than 20 million Americans off of healthcare, which also means that cuts many people's access to life-saving, gender-affirming care and treatment for trans and queer Americans. And so the Democrats, can condemn, they might condemn like verbally what Republicans are doing, but they actually aren't offering any material solutions to the issues. And this is really just because they don't have the solutions either, right? And to me, that's not inspiring leadership in the wake of rising hate and division. To me, that's weakness and that's cowardice. And we deserve a lot more from our leaders. And so we see the scapegoating of the anti-trans legislation going in both directions. At the same time that trans folks are scapegoated to be the creators of this violent and dangerous gender ideology, we can scapegoat certain sections of our class, in this case, mainly white rural folks, and like it said, assume them to be creators of devastating and violent rhetoric, when in reality, all of this has been workshopped and none of it has been created by us, but put forward with no other goal than to separate our class and with no other goal than to look away from the actual issues and things that are affecting us on a daily basis. The last thing that I'll say is if I feel a little like feisty tonight, it's because I am a little pissed off, to be honest. If you haven't heard, in Atlanta, Atlanta has been in a state of emergency for like about 2 days now. On Friday night, there was a main water pipeline in a city that burst, and it basically caused a domino effect. So it made 30 other pipes throughout the city burst. And so this basically left thousands of people without water. And our Democrat mayor, Andre Dickens, remained like completely silent about the crisis for like a full 30 hours, while people were left wondering why their homes and why their businesses had no water. And then when he finally told the city what was happening, he couldn't even give people an estimate about when they would get water back. And so you have hospitals with low pressure, you have homes, residencies, businesses with no pressure or with no water, and then huge swaths of the city are under a boil advisory. And yesterday, my friend and I, we were driving, he was in town, and we were driving in Midtown, and there was a part of the street where there was water literally just shooting like 20 feet into the air. And then you could just see on the side of the street, just like a river of water. It was like a rapid of water, just like pouring down the street. And we were passing basically where one of the main pipes had burst. And so we ended up picking up like 6 cases of water last night to bring to church today, because, as I said, a lot of residencies, including shelters, had had no water for about 2 days, and they didn't know when it was going to come back. And so when I was preparing for tonight, I was wondering, I was thinking about like this water incident and this water crisis and how it relates to what we're talking about tonight. And at first, it's kind of hard to draw the connection, but then I was thinking about how, often we hear things that are, kind of these fear-mongering things of like society is crumbling, the social order is crumbling. And I think oftentimes stuff like that is kind of like a dog whistle for like pretty like white supremacist or like homophobic ideology. But today, when I was at my church passing out water to people and asking them, how long has it been since you've had running water? How long has it been since you've had clean water? Have you had any contact from the city about when you might get water back? I just like think back to this image of this pipe bursting in like the middle of a city. And I just thought to myself, like, our infrastructure is actually crumbling. Like, in a lot of ways, like the society around us, like, is actually crumbling. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in like really real ways, right? Like, we feel it. Our water gets turned off and we have no idea when it's going to be turned back on, because our infrastructure and our government is failing us. Like, there's a legitimate fear that we have and that folks have, because it's really scary right now. And things feel really scary right now. And because there's this fear that people have because they sense that like things are falling apart, there are movements and people that know that. and they jump on that very real fear and they turn folks to just hate. And they turn folks and so it's our responsibility as revolutionaries to be able to counter that problem, because it's not good for anyone, but also it doesn't get to the root of the actual problem. Having hate, first of all, like when you have that, it's just painful and it doesn't feel good, but also it doesn't turn the water back on. It doesn't fix the issues that we're actually up against. And so all it does is it's trying to distract us from the real issue, which is capitalism. And that all the crumbling that we feel around us and all the stuff that we feel about the social order and society falling apart, what that is just capitalism in crisis around us every single day, and trying to figure out how the hell it's going to keep running its course and how the hell it will keep biding its time. And we're just in the center of that. And so all this to say, right, how can we use this Pride Month to find a way to develop our own working class concept of what gender liberation is? How can we find this month to know that the only people who have a solution to these issues and the only people who are really going to be fighting for what we actually need is us, is the people, is our people and the folks in our movement? How can we use this time to continue to create an ideology that uplifts the power and the strength of our identities as queer and as trans revolutionaries, but also places us within a larger revolutionary struggle of ending global capitalism once and for all? And so I'm so grateful that we have an opportunity at this Pride Month to really just be lifting up some of the wonderful leaders and struggles from across the country. And I thank y'all too for the time tonight for me to be able to share a little bit more about this article. It's been something that's been in the making for a while. And I appreciate y'all's time tonight.